Good morning, everyone. I'm Christina Jairaj, Modern Workplace BDM from Ingram Micro Cloud. Joining with us today is Robert Crane, MVP, the subject matter expert. Rob will take us through the team, partner opportunities, and partner takeaways. And I will quickly run through additional offerings around teams from Ingram Micro Cloud. Rob, over to you now.
Thank you very much. So let me make sure that I can move the slides down here. Click and go down, hopefully. All right, do it this way. Okay, so thanks everybody for coming along today. We're going to be focusing on talking about Microsoft Teams. So a good place to start is to understand a little bit more about this unique service in the Microsoft 365 stack. The product Teams has been now around for about 2 years, and the first thing that you need to appreciate is that Teams is available with all Office 365 suite. So if you have a suite that includes SharePoint, Exchange, Business Premium, Microsoft 365 Business, that will include a license for your users to have access to the Teams environment. The idea with Teams is if you can think of Teams in the simplest form as a skin or an aggregation point for things like Exchange, SharePoint, lots and lots of applications are brought together under a single look and feel interface, which is known as Teams. So this means that, for example, when you're using Teams, you are in fact using SharePoint. When you are using Teams, you are in fact using Exchange behind the covers. The idea with Teams is it keeps the interface simple for the users so they don't get confused by having to jump around between multiple browser windows and multiple services. Now, the big positive with that is the single pane of glass concept. So we all know that users have a lot of things open on their desktop. They're not quite sure where to go for different sets of information. Having a single pane of glass that they can refer to, that they can work in, that will have their conversations, that will have their files, allow you to extend that with additional navigation as well as integrate with third-party applications is a very big positive for the service and for the users because it simplifies their life having to go to a single location. Now, one of the other really great things about Teams is that there is an app for every platform. So there is a Teams for iOS, there is a Teams for Android, there is a Teams for the Microsoft and Macintosh desktop. So again, this means that this single pane of glass, this single look and feel, this single service is available to all your users wherever they may be. Now, an important thing also to remember is that Microsoft Teams is enabled by Office 365 tenants that it is available on. Now, I'll cover off why this has been the case, but it's important to remember that if you have users who are looking around their interface, they will by default have access to Teams. They can click on it, they can start creating Teams and potentially make a mess of their installation before you can go in there and speak to them about it. So my advice to you is to get on the front foot early, talk to your customers about Teams, help them understand, help them design and build the structure before they go out and start making mistakes that will take time and energy to recover. Now, if you want, there is also a free version of Teams that is available. So this is not something that is part of an Office 365 tenant. It's a completely standalone Teams environment. Now, where this may have opportunity for resellers is if you are, for example, working with maybe a community organization, sporting organization, soccer club, cricket club, local community environment, then you could set up a free Microsoft team for those people. They could all come in, contribute. They would get a better feel. They would get a better experience, improve their productivity, a single location for them to have all information. And if you're smart about it, you can then present yourself as the expert. And when people want the same solution in their commercial environment, you can go to them and say, look, we did Teams for our local community. How about we do it for your business? So again, don't rule out the fact that there is a free version that you can use to potentially leverage up and get people to understand the value of what Teams is. Now, the administration for Teams is done like any other service in Office 365 and Microsoft 365. It's done through the admin portal. So if you go into the standard admin portal, you go into the bottom left-hand side, you'll see that there is an option there for Teams. Now, what's happening also is that the older service, Skype for Business, is transitioning into Teams. So if you have an existing customer that has the tenant for a while, they are transitioning from Skype for Business over to Teams. If you have a new customer, they will basically go straight into Teams, so they won't see Skype for Business. So all the functionality that was part of Skype for Business is being rolled into Teams to handle communications, to handle the ability to do voice meetings, all that sort of stuff is done in Teams, and all of that is administered basically using the admin portal. Now, the key point here is, from a reseller's point of view, is that Teams requires administration. Teams requires people to set up, manage, maintain, and that's a service that most resellers can then provide to their customers. Now, when we talk about Teams, we talk about a new way of collaborating. Now, the way I like to describe it to people and to our customers is in this manner. So I like to break up the environment that we have today into the old, the new, and the modern. So the old way is typically data on a file server, data on file shares. Collaboration happens via email. So people are adding an attachment, sending it to each other, replying that, creating multiple versions. They're working with individual calendars. They're writing stuff down. When they communicate, they're basically trying to do it on the phone, leaving voice messages for each other, playing phone tag. And they're typically going to a place to work. So they go to an office, sit down in front of a computer, and that's where they work. Now, why is that old? Well, again, we know that many people are mobile now. They're working on their phone. They don't go into the office. They work from home. They work remotely. So again, this is the old environment. Now, what typically happens is the users come in and say, this is difficult for me to do my job. It's too difficult for me to start sharing files and working with third parties and, again, getting the stuff that I need to get my job done. So they go to the IT department and they ask for assistance, and it all becomes a bit too difficult, a bit too hard. So then what the user does is, in today's world, they basically go and implement Shadow IT. So that means if they want to share files, they will go and implement the free version of Dropbox, because there's no friction to it. They install it, they can share files. The user doesn't care about the security or how it works. All they want to do is get their job done. And there are so many web-based tools out there to allow them to do that job. And I'm sure many people have come across the environment where Shadow IT is rampant inside an organization. Now, this Shadow IT is great. It allows people to get their jobs done, but it lacks compliance, it lacks security. So again, we have to allow users to do what they need to do, but we also have to maintain the security and the compliance. Now, when we implement something like Office 365, this is really good because we can put a modern mailbox with linked calendars, shared mailboxes inside that. We've got SharePoint to do common files. We've got OneDrive for Business to do our individual files. So again, that's all locked together in a nice environment that is controlled by a single Azure AD login. We also get tools to do communications like Yammer for conversations. We get Skype. We also get things like Power BI, Planner. So the good thing about this is rather than in the old world with individual data being in silos, not connected, we can put everything in Office 365 and have the compliance that we need. But unfortunately, the new world still presents a challenge for users. The reality here is the challenge is because our users still can't get their job done. If they want to share a file with a group of people outside the business, so let's take an example of maybe a building construction company that needs to share multiple files, plans with frontline workers, with architects, with a range of people. To do that, they still require the setup, the installation, the sharing of things like the SharePoint environment, which again is very intimidating for a user who may not have done it. So if they can't get their job done, they fall back to using Shadow IT again. So even though some users have Office 365, if they don't have the skill set, if they don't feel comfortable, they're going to go back to the easiest tool that they can find. Now, with this in mind, Microsoft went ahead and created the Teams product. Now, the idea with a team is when you create a team, so if you go into Teams and create a new team, immediately you create that team, you'll get a shared mailbox, a full SharePoint site, planner, conversations, a calendar, a whole range of tools that are automatically provisioned for you. Basically, hide that. basically because the environment is that we want things to happen immediately. So let's see. Can someone from Ingram there click on that? I can't get rid of that. Slight pause in the communications while we take care of the visuals. So the reality here is when you create a team, all of this is provisioned immediately. Now that's very different from an environment in Office 365 where typically what had to happen is that you need to go and create the mailbox and then create the SharePoint site. So the idea here is when a user wants to collaborate, they basically just create a team and they get all this stuff whether they use it or not. Now, the idea here is that this then means that we shift control from being the IT admin. So the IT admin in the old world would have to go and create the share, do the permissions, give users access to it, to a world where now the user can create the Microsoft team. Any user by default can create the Microsoft team. All right, that means that you can get potentially multiple teams with the same name. Again, it's something that users can do by default. Now, we also get a change in the way the data is presented to us in our environment. We move from a very structured files and folders, network shares, controlled by the admin, to an environment where a user potentially can create as many teams as they want. So they can have a team for Project 1, Project 2, Project 3, for accounts, for whatever. So the idea is they create a team and they just dump files in there, or they just have conversations. So rather than it being in a very structured manner with folders and subfolders and very deep, they tend to create very flat structures. The reason for that is that in the modern world, structure is not that important because we've got search. We just dump everything into a single bucket or a smaller number of containers, and we use search to find what we want. So again, this is a major change. And we also move from a world of accessing information linearly to a parallel universe. So most users, again, are accessing multiple social media networks, maybe doing email, doing a range of things in their personal environment. The expectation is they can do that in business. You're typically going to be working on multiple projects, especially in the SMB, you're going to be doing 3 or 4 different jobs. You're going to have to be across multiple conversations. If this is happening in email, it's very hard to keep track of. You've got to move things around. And think about email, the way you access email, you go to inbox, your subfolders, and you work your way through that. The idea is that we have to work in parallel. You might be part of the finance team and the admin team, and you're going to have to be across information in both of those quickly and easily. So again, we're moving from this world of the old way of thinking, very siloed way of thinking. The challenge with that is that most users don't want to work in this way. They want to work in an open way where they can easily and quickly share information using tools that they are familiar with in their personal life. So what is Teams? So basically what Teams is, it allows you to do your calls, your chats, you do your meetings through there. The big thing is its integration with Office 365. So it's integrated with SharePoint, it's integrated with OneDrive, it's integrated with all these other applications that are in Office 365. It's easy for the user to, again, have a single pane of glass that we talked about. Now, we can also extend this by adding third-party apps. There is a third-party app store. We can extend it with Microsoft inbuilt apps. We can, again, build that to suit exactly what we need. Now, under the covers, behind all of this, because Teams is built on Office 365, it's built on the same security, compliance, and manageability that we have with all the other services that are there. So what that means is that the ability to have version control, that's part of SharePoint, that's built into the availability here. So again, that's a real benefit here of the fact that Teams is built on the infrastructure that is already provided to us and the security and the manageability that is part of this environment. Now, again, as I mentioned, the Skype for Business functionality, the calling, the meetings, all of that is being rolled into Teams. Now, the reason we do that is if you're in a conversation or you're in a chat session with a user, many of us have had the situation where we like to escalate that quickly and easily to a video chat or a voice chat. Again, because this is built into Teams, this allows us to do that very quickly and very easily. So again, this concept of a single tool that allows us to collaborate, whether it's on files, whether it's on conversations, or whether it's in video chat. Now, the possibility going forward is that this chat these sort of calls can be integrated with local phone calls as well. So there are options available that would allow you to integrate Teams into the calling environment as well. So again, plenty of benefits there. Now, as I mentioned, the integration here with your other Office 365 applications, all of this allows you to do things like co-authoring. It again allows you to integrate with SharePoint, OneNote, Power BI, Planner. So again, think of a Microsoft team that has project-based. You can, again, put in a Microsoft Planner that allow people to manage and schedule tasks, but have that all displayed in a single pane of glass that everybody can access and work with and be available on all your desktop applications. Now, all of the information that's in Teams, the conversation, again, filters into the Microsoft Graph. So the Microsoft Graph allows you to see the relationships that people have between the information and the users they're working with. So again, you get intelligence around who you spend most of your time conversing with, when meetings are scheduled, whether other individuals should be invited as well. So behind it, underneath all this, is the Microsoft Graph, looking at behaviors and suggesting and helping people become more productive with the product. Now, remember, as I mentioned, there is email integration. Effectively, Teams will give you a shared mailbox. So if you're big on using shared mailboxes, you get that as part of the team environment, and you can use that. Now, one of the really cool things you can do with Teams is that you can set it so that emails can be forwarded or sent into an area within Teams. So what that means is you could set up a team maybe for customer support. They could email into that email address, and your internal users could have conversations around those emails that basically come into the team directly. So again, the whole idea here is this is a solution that can solve a lot of productivity and collaboration challenges for a business. Now, as mentioned, you've got the ability to integrate third-party apps, very common apps like Trello, Asana, those sort of things can be easily integrated. So if you have users who are already using those and like those tools, they don't have to abandon those. They can integrate a lot of those, especially the standard sort of web-based SaaS applications directly into Teams. The benefit is single pane of glass. Everybody can access those sort of things without having to bounce around multiple applications. One of the really, I suppose, the ways that I see that a lot of value can be added is around these bots, around this automation. There is so much work inside a business that is done manually in a repetitive way, day in and day out, that really could be automated and then free up people and resources to go off and do things that are more productive. So again, Teams is going to give us that ability. Things like SharePoint will give us that ability, Microsoft Flow, again, all integrated into this single environment that allows us to, again, once we've put in the base level, so once we put in something like Teams, that's not the end of it. We can go in and then start adding automation rules. We can then go in and start extending. We can then start building out from that. So just implementing Teams is not the end of the solution. It is really the beginning of the opportunities that can be provided around the collaboration for an organization. Now, that extension, that growth of the collaboration environment is going to be done by someone. There's no query in my mind that that extension, that growth of what you see in Teams will be handled by someone. The question is will it be done by a reseller, or will it be done by the customer, or a combination? All right, so that's the opportunity, is to look at Teams as not an endpoint, but a beginning in which you can build and add value onto that for your customers as well. And due to Microsoft's focus on the Teams product, we are seeing, like I said, at the moment, over 150 integrations. These are being added daily because of this focus that Microsoft has on Teams. Again, it's drawing more and more applications, more and more focus, and again, it's going to continue to grow and improve, and again, add more integrations down the track. So again, think of this just as the beginning. As I said, Teams is now about 2 years old, and it's done remarkably well in the short time period that it has been available. Now, one of the most common questions that I get about Teams is, okay, we see that there's a location, as noted here, in a channel inside Teams for files. Where are those files stored? Well, those files basically are stored in a dedicated SharePoint site that you get with Teams. So every time you create a team, you get a dedicated linked SharePoint team site. Now, because SharePoint can be a little daunting for a lot of users to move from, who have come from a traditional files and folders, you will see that the complexity of SharePoint is masked when it is in Teams. So when you look at the files folder there in Teams, you see basically a subset, a limited view of the SharePoint site. So the idea is you see one document library and the folders underneath. So this, again, makes it simple for users to work with without the complexity of SharePoint over the top. But what it means is in the back end, behind the scenes, we've still got a full version of SharePoint running that we can use and access. So again, this is the upsell or the growth for the power users. So once they've got beyond the functionality of what Teams can do, they can still keep growing and start using SharePoint. Hopefully by that time, they're more comfortable with using the web-based tools like SharePoint, and they can grow into that functionality. Now, a certain subset of users may never progress beyond the basics of what you see in Teams, all right? For some users, just opening and closing files or working with files in this simplified environment is more than they'll ever need, okay? So not all users have to use SharePoint, and likewise, users who need more power, who want more functionality, who want to do the metadata and all that sort of stuff that SharePoint is well known for, can do that, but they need to do that in the SharePoint environment. So the key here is to remember is that Teams is a simplified version of what you see in SharePoint, all right? It doesn't have all the same functionality because that would make it SharePoint. The idea here is when you're moving users from files and folders, you move them to Teams initially, simplified interface, and then the next step after that is to full SharePoint when they become more familiar with the environment. A lot of people, again, struggle with that large jump from files and folders into a SharePoint web-based collaboration environment, and putting Teams in the middle there can simplify that and make that transition much easier, basically, for them. So again, when you click on the SharePoint option, you will see you get a full SharePoint site. This is exactly the same look and the feel. The functionality, there is no difference between the SharePoint site you get with Teams and basically a SharePoint site you create manually. The only difference is obviously the one in Teams is linked to Teams. That's where the files go. But as you see, you can extend that, you can create pages, you can make that a fully blown intranet, you can add additional document libraries, you can link those additional libraries back into Teams if you want. So again, this is the growth path. This is the way that you can scale beyond what the basic interface provides you in Teams. So the important thing here to remember is when you create a team, you create a SharePoint site. That SharePoint site can host the files and the documents from typically the on-prem environment, the old file server, the old network shares. They would go into this location. They would then appear in Teams. Now, as I mentioned, one of the key issues or one of the key things here that you can do is this automation. So if you hadn't had a look, go in and have a look at the additional options that are available to you basically in the store, in the apps area for Teams. You'll notice, for example, one of the ones that is noted there is Polly. So Polly is a third-party application that allows you to run quick polls. So again, rather than sending an email out asking what everybody wants to do for lunch or what they think about this idea, it's so much easier to create the poll using something like Polly in your team and, again, get answers quickly. And remember that we've also got the ability behind the bots that we see here, typically third-party bots, we've also got Microsoft Flow. So Microsoft Flow can be used to automate between applications. So, for example, we could say that when a conversation mentioning a certain keyword appears in a team, then take this action or notify this user. Or again, when an email comes in with a file attachment, take that file attachment and put it in a certain location within SharePoint. So again, the big benefit here is that having a standard platform to work on like Teams, which is built on stuff like SharePoint, you can now start value adding around, especially around automation, using the inbuilt tools like Microsoft Flow. So look at the commonalities between businesses. What do they need automating? So some very common tasks that need automating inside a business are things like leave requests, holiday application, all those sort of things can be automated and save people time and money. And because they're common across businesses, you can then template those and move those between, again, different customers that you have. So as I mentioned, the enterprise security, all that compliance that is built into the standard Office 365 product, again, is part of Teams and all the services that it uses. Okay, so we can, for example, work with Teams and implement and control it using MDM, MAM, and Intune. We've got our e-discovery abilities in there. We've got control and secure access using multi-factor authentication. So all of this is protected by the security items that Microsoft provides for their base product. So if we want to look at how Teams works, my advice to you is to think about Teams typically by function. So for example, customer support, finance, HR, admin, they make a great team. So let's take the example of finance, for example. So the finance team goes and creates a team called finance. They put their files in there. They work on that together. They invite the people in who work on that finance area. They can converse. They can have conversations in that area, and they know that that's only seen by members of their team. Then if they wanted to, for example, have a sales team, you create another team, and again, the conversations files can live in those locations. For users, all they need to know about is, okay, which teams do I have access to? And again, my advice to you is to look at it typically around functions. So create a team for management, create a team for admin, create a team for finance, and that's the location where the information, the conversations and the files for those functions actually live. Now, one of the really powerful things about Teams is its ability to allow guest access. So guest access means users who are not licensed within that Office 365 tenant. So the example would be, again, back to a project management example. We have an organization that is doing a building project. They have third-party people outside their organization that are shipping information that want to be involved in the conversation around doing this project. So they can be added as guests. So basically, you can invite anybody into a team, right, as long as they have an email address. Once they are invited and accept access to the team, they have the same rights out of the box as all other team members generally. So again, they'll have the ability to create messages, to write messages, to upload files, to view files, and generally collaborate, right? So this guest access is not an additional add-on. It is part of the Office 365 subscription. It is no additional cost. And basically, it is handled through something called Azure B2B, business to business, all right? So every tenant, once the guest access has been enabled, are able to invite external third-party users just by an email address to come in and work with them. Now, one of the hesitancies I see from smaller customers and smaller resellers is, well, I'm a business of one or a business of two. I don't really need to have a team because we can just talk to each other over the cubicle wall. But I think you need to look at this in the fact that you're going to be working potentially with many different people inside and outside your organization. So again, in my case, a business of one, but I've created a marketing team. Inside the marketing team leads all my marketing material and also automations that I've created. Now, the reason that I did that is because if I want to bring in a third party, outsource some of my marketing or management or whatever, I can do that. I can simply invite that person into the team. They can start working on it. When they're finished their job, I can remove them from the team. Again, don't look at this as a limitation on the number of users. Look at the problem or the pain point that can be solved by using tools like Teams. Now, again, this will give you basically a summary of what a guest user can do versus a fully licensed user. You'll see that most of the functionality is there. So, for example, a guest cannot create a team. Again, they can't view the org chart. So, again, the guests are designed to be exactly that, people that come in and collaborate on the common information. So, the idea here is let's talk about the framework here. So, many of you are probably aware that there is OneDrive, there is SharePoint, there is Teams, there is Yammer, there is a range of collaboration tools that are available to us. So the framework that I like to use and talk about is basically thinking about it as a layered approach. So at layer one, we have OneDrive for Business, then Teams, we have SharePoint. So inside SharePoint, there are actually three ways of doing SharePoint, something called hub sites, communication sites, and team sites, Yammer, and then external users. So the idea is that OneDrive for Business is designed for a person to generally create. They spend most of their time creating documents in their OneDrive. Whereas if they go to the intranet, they're going to be consuming. They're going to be looking at the intranet, downloading information. The audience also changes from one OneDrive for Business per user to an intranet shared across the organization. So again, the way that a OneDrive for Business is organized or structured inside really doesn't matter to the business, because the information's in a bucket. The user controls that environment. No other user's looking at it. But on the other side, something like an intranet is something that's very structured, appears in a standard way that the organization wants to work for them. So again, this is where the value add can be looked at. It's okay, we can create an intranet which is common across the organization, but we don't need to worry about the structure inside of OneDrive. We just enable people and allow them to copy their documents up there. So generally our flow of information is going to be from our OneDrive through to our intranet. So we'll create in our OneDrive, push it into Teams, do a bit of work on that, push it to SharePoint, and eventually publish it all the way through the organization. Now, again, the idea here is the control changes from a user. The user has full control of their OneDrive to the fact that an intranet, they're probably going to be viewing it. So the business is the one that sets the structure and the look and the feel. In a OneDrive for Business, you can create as many subfolders as you want. You can put files wherever you want. It doesn't matter. It's ad hoc. Search allows us to do that. When we look at a SharePoint intranet, it's going to be very structured. It's going to look like a traditional file server. It's going to be set out in a certain way that the company wants to present to their internal users. And again, we're going to move from a world where we're working in OneDrive, we're working with multiple teams, to a location where we typically work with one Yammer. So Yammer would be designed to work across the whole, a conversation across the whole organization, whereas chats in Teams are for the finance team or for the admin team only, where Yammer would be across the organization. Now, if you go back to a previous slide, you will notice that the arrows on the left-hand side line up to that new, the old, new, and modern world. So again, this is where solutions like Office 365, Microsoft 365 with Teams, OneDrive, and that are solving that sort of problem. They allow you to still work in the old world if you want to still have files and folders, but it allows you also at the same time to use the latest tools like an intranet and Microsoft Teams. So a quick example here is you would create a document in, a user creates a document in their OneDrive, they would push it into their team for approval and additional value add, and then it will be pushed to the intranet and basically, work its way to the outside. So an example here would be, let's say I create a document. Where do I create a document? I'm working on a budget inside my OneDrive for Business. Think of my OneDrive for Business as a user's home. You do a bit of work at home, you sit on the kitchen table, you get work done out of hours. It's comfortable, it's easy, you can do that in your pajamas. But typically you're not going to invite your whole company or all your group members into your house just to work on this document. Where you do that is you move the document once you've added your value into your team. This is a group of people that you work with, the finance team. They then add additional value to it. And then once they've added additional value to it, that then gets pushed into the global repository, the library of information for the whole company. Now, the people who are in the finance team, they create the budget, but that is going to be consumed or viewed by the whole organization. So again, that has to be put in a location where the whole organization can access that. So another example here is I'm going to consume a document. So let's say I want to do a leave request. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the library, right? The common library, which is the SharePoint library, the intranet, where all the company documents are. In this case, it's an expense form created by the HR team. I'm not in the HR team, but I need to use that document and consume it. So what I do is I take a copy of it into my OneDrive. I then fill it out, do what I need to do with it. When I'm completed, I push that again into the area for my team where my manager would approve it and then push it up the chain. All right. So again, this structure, this basic framework that I've mentioned there works well whether I'm creating or whether I'm consuming. So again, typically I use my OneDrive to do my consumption. My team is where I work with a group of people. I'm still making changes, but the final endpoint is typically a intranet, a common location across the organization. So what we've got here is the ability to have structured and unstructured environments. So we can have an intranet which is very structured. It has a top-level site. It has sub-sites for different divisions. It has different sets of information, but that's controlled by the organization. On the other side, we can have a very ad hoc environment. So our finance team can create the folder structure they want in a way that suits them. That could be very different from the way that a HR team creates and manages their document environment. Again, it doesn't matter. All right, the reason that a lot of this doesn't matter is because we use the functionality built into Microsoft 365, which is search. Okay, so search is now available and is available in Teams. You see it in the top banner. You can search across your documents, your conversations. If you use something like Delve, you can also search your email attachments. So search is the superpower that is part of Microsoft 365 that very few people use. When you want to find information on the intranet, you're going to go and use the search engine to find what you want. That same power, but focused on your internal information, is available to you, to all users. And the good thing about that is it's security trim, which means that if you run a search for the CEO's pay slip, as long as that's been secured properly and put in a bucket that other users don't have access to, it won't magically appear in search, right? So searching is security trimmed. It obeys the permissions that the current user has when they're using a tool like search, all right? So think about it like this. You start with a typical file and folder location on an on-prem server. You want to migrate that or move that into the basic framework that I've shown you through Yammer, SharePoint, Teams, and OneDrive. So basically, you take that folder from a file server, you would then run it through a filter. Why do you run it through a filter? Well, guess what? Some of the stuff on file servers has been sitting there for hundreds and thousands and millions of years potentially and is next to useless. They're just keeping it there because they want to, okay? So again, someone needs to go through and filter that information and determine what needs to be kept, whether it needs to be archived, USB, kept locally, put in a SharePoint site of its own, or whatever. So that first process of filtering the information is a value add that you can add to customers. The reseller can run tools, go through the complete structure of a file server, and then provide a report that says, you know what, you've got 3 gigs worth of data, which is more than 10 years old. We suggest that you move it to this location, all right? So there's a value add that you can add because users aren't going to clean up their file servers. They never have, they never will, and again, this is a value add that you can have. Help them structure and work out what they want to keep. Now, once we've done that, we take the information that is of value, and then what we need to do is we would start by pushing obvious user information to their OneDrive, their desktop, their personal documents, their profiles can go, excuse me, straight into their OneDrive for Business. All right, that's an easy way to move things. And using the known folder move, which is part of OneDrive now, you can move those automatically for you. And there are abilities to roll this out in an automated fashion. So desktop files, home drive, profile, that sort of stuff is the most logical stuff that goes into users' OneDrive for Business. What do you send to Teams? Well, stuff that makes sense to Teams is by functional location, as I mentioned. So the finance team put their finance documents inside their team. HR put it in their team, or maybe you've got a team by location. New South Wales put their stuff in the New South Wales team. Makes it pretty easy, okay? How it's structured underneath that, not so important. You just put the New South Wales stuff in the New South Wales team and they can work it out, all right? So in our standalone team site, this is where we would create an archive. So if you wanted to have an ability to keep all that information from a file server but not have an on-prem environment, you could create a standalone dedicated SharePoint team site, which is called Archive, market read only, and move that old data into that location. So people can search it, they can access it, they can use that as a starting point, but they can't go in and modify it. Another good example of a standalone team site is an extranet. So if you want to publish just a SharePoint site with no conversations, just a place for people to go and download files or get updated information or whatever, you can create a SharePoint, standalone SharePoint intranet to do that. So there's some examples there. Now, a communication site works as typically like an intranet. It's a company-wide, nice look and feel, again, navigation style, newspaper, magazine to share information about the company. Now, the last one is a hub site. Again, so a hub site allows you to provide consistent navigation across everything underneath it. So consistent navigation to a communication site, an intranet, the teams. So the reason you would use a hub site is that if you ever change or you add something or you do a bit of restructuring, you don't have to go and rebuild subsites and move stuff around as you used to do in the old world of SharePoint. The idea is you create a very flat structure and it's linked together just using basically URL links like the internet. Basically, use the hub site to connect all these together. So your hub site is the way to manage navigation corporate-wide. The communication sites are the way to do, like I said, the common information, policies, procedures, employee handbooks across the organization. Standalone SharePoint sites for dedicated users, and then Teams and OneDrive below it, okay? Then above that, again, you can use something like Yammer to do corporate-wide chat. So this would be chat that is outside of finance, HR, and it applies to all the teams, all the users. Now, do you have to use every single service here? No. If you just want to do Teams, you can do that. If you just want to do SharePoint, you could do that. That's the flexibility of this tool. Yes, there are a lot of options, but it's a matter of sitting down and providing value and saying this tool makes the most sense in this way. And also you can add these and improve on these as you go through over time. Now, my advice generally is to start at the either end. To start with OneDrive, so get users used to using files and folders in a SharePoint style environment, uploading, downloading, and then also start with Yammer. Now, the reason I suggest that is because OneDrive, pure files, Yammer, pure conversations. So when they get to using Teams, they've already seen files and folders, they've already seen conversations and chat. Now it's not such an information overload. So I've seen it where giving people Teams is even still too much. They get thrown out. So again, starting off with OneDrive and Yammer gets them into this new world, gets them conversing, gets them working. Now, obviously the messaging will drop off from Yammer over time, but remember, think of it as an adoption tool. It's there, it's available to you, it can be used very effectively when it comes to adoption. So let's focus on the specific opportunities for resellers. So as I mentioned, the initial one is going to be cleaning and restructuring the data. File servers are generally full of crap. I would suggest that at least 25% of it can be thrown out immediately. Who's going to do that? Not the user. That's something, the value add that the reseller can go in and say, you know what, this looks good, this is old, we haven't used this, why are there these many files or this type of file, let's do this. You can go in and create a new structure. All right, so an opportunity to move from an on-prem file server to Office 365, Microsoft 365 and Teams is the ability to sit down and say, you know what, let's restructure this. Let's do this in a different way. Let's try this versus that, rather than this legacy way of files and folders that have been on the file server for 10 years that nobody wants to change. Here's an opportunity to start afresh, to really think about this and give people guidance as the best approach to designing effective structure. There's obviously going to be the ability for resellers to migrate data to SharePoint. So you're going to have to take files from a file server and move them to a team, to an archive, to wherever. Right? The user's not going to do that. They are going to want to pay a reseller to do that for them. Okay, so again, there's the most common opportunity around migrating files. But what about training and onboarding? Don't just give your users access to the team, or don't let them stumble upon it. Again, provide, okay, this is the best way to use it. Here's some training material. Here's some videos. This is best practices. This is what we recommend. This is the best approach. We do it this way. All right, just don't leave your users wandering in the wilderness to use these tools because they end up using it in an ineffective way. And don't forget that Teams is not just about access on a desktop or on a browser, through a browser. It is accessible on mobile devices. The big growth area for devices is mobility, right? Set up Teams on their mobile devices, set it up on their iOS, show them how to use it, show them the advantages, show how it integrates. That means you're also probably going to have to set up OneDrive and Outlook and all that. So there again is the opportunity to go and set this stuff up for the users as part of the onboarding process. Charge them a fee for it, roll it in as a value add, whatever you've got to do, but don't leave users to set it up themselves, all right? And again, here's the external access, right? So the way to start is set up external access to yourself. Set up an external team that you and your customers can come in and converse. Set it up as a user group. Allow external users who are your customers to come into your team, have conversations, post interesting articles, upload good files in there, get them using that. use external access and help the users build that for their third party, right? That needs to be secured, it needs to be managed, it needs to be structured. Someone's going to have to do that. Customers are looking to get your advice as a reseller, as a skilled IT provider, to give them recommendations on best practices. And the one that I noted here, which is the most important, I think, once you've done all these basics, is to keep in your mind automation. How can we make mundane tasks be removed or replaced with automation tools like Microsoft Flow or whatever? All right, that's where the real value add is, right? And don't think it has to be something massive or huge. It could be something very straightforward that you can use to replace. So my takeaways in summing up here is Microsoft Teams, you have to think about this differently. You have to approach it in a different way. It's a very flat structure. Search is very powerful. And again, think of it as a single pane of glass. All right. It allows users out of the box to create spaces they need to do work, right? Does it matter that it's maybe not as structured as files and folders? Not really. Again, it makes it nice and easy for them and allows them to get their work done. Right, you can make sure that one of the value adds is, okay, how are we going to naming conventions? Because if a user can create a team, you can end up with accounts, and more accounts. So again, what's your recommendation on a way to go up and set up the teams in an appropriate manner? Another value add maybe is that the user fills out a form, online form, when they want to create a team, and you as an admin create it for them, so everything's consistent. How do you do backup and recovery, right? If a team dies, or if there's a problem, or we need to recover something, how do you do that? That's important to know, because your users, once they start using it, they're going to ask you, how do I get this stuff back? Or this stuff magically disappeared, where is it? All right, and again, the main thing here is Teams is only going to grow much more widely, and it's going to be far more adopted, and it's going to continue to grow at breakneck speed. So from Microsoft's point of view, it's Teams, and more Teams. So if you're not using Teams, certainly get into it, use it, understand the product so that you can sell it and help your users get the most out of it. Now, hopefully I have some resources there for you. You'll get access to these slides after the event. Lots and lots of stuff on Teams. Certainly recommend you go in and do that. But I think with that, that is my part over. So I will hand back and...
Thanks, Rob. Very valuable info on Teams. Thank you so much. So if you guys have got any questions, feel free to drop into the chat box and we will answer at the end of the session. Ingram Micro now offers direct routing for Teams through Switch Connect. It's a referral model and it's fully channelized. It's a Telstra complete partner. Switch Connect enables full phone system capabilities for Microsoft Teams and Office 365. So if you need any more information, feel free to get in touch with the Ingram Micro Cloud sales team, and we'll provide you all the details. So, automate, protect, and restore through AvePoint Cloud Backup for Teams, projects, and mailboxes. All sites, drives, and Exchange could be automated. Automatic backups up to 4 times daily with flexibility, capacity options, and granular restore in or out of place with search-based owner date creation or folder name. And it could be restored using the AvePoint Azure storage, or you can use the Azure storage through the file system. So AvePoint has got the promotion running, which is around $300 Visa card for minimum of 300 seats with a minimum of 1 customer based. So Cloud Movers is back. It's a premier loyalty program for our CSP partners. You can win points for each sale on Microsoft CSP products. As you can see, you can make 1,000 points for each Microsoft 365 business sale. The campaign runs from now until end of June. So you can earn points which can then be converted into cash. Top 4 partners on leaderboard will win a luxury supercar driving experience on Sunshine Coast. So register to the program today using this link above. And if you got any questions, feel free to put it through to the chat box.
So I do notice that there is one question here about the ability to do video conferencing. So Microsoft Teams does include video conferencing. So if you are part of a team, you can obviously do a video conference with your team members immediately. It shows up in the chat. You can invite external parties to that. So you can go in and basically schedule a meeting with Teams, send them the link like was done in Skype for Business. Okay, so that functionality is almost basically identical. And the one for doing things like GoToWebinar style is something called live events. So live events is something that is done through Teams, can be surfaced in Yammer and SharePoint. So basically the ability to do video conferencing from the very small team to the very large team is covered basically by the products. So again, it can do all that sort of stuff, and a lot of it, especially for the smaller teams, the half dozen or dozen or so people that are meeting, that can be done within Teams directly, or you can schedule a meeting, send somebody the link, and they just join via Teams. If they haven't got the client, they can join basically through a browser. So that certainly is supported. So again, hopefully that answers that question.
Rob, I cannot see any more questions coming through. Can you please read it out if there are any?
Got one here there's one here that says, can you view the calendar? Oops, I know it's moved up. I think the one here is, how do you back up the data? All right, so at the moment, was I mentioned there a third-party product? Again, it's covered by the way that Microsoft retains the data. Typically, third-party products at this stage can back up the shared mailbox and the files and folders, so the stuff that's in SharePoint. However, backing up things like the conversation history, and that is not generally supported outside the Microsoft environment at this point in time. The APIs are available, and we expect third parties to be able to build that ability in shortly. But at this stage, what you can back up inside a team is typically what's in the shared mailbox and also what's in the SharePoint site, as you could do as a standalone service. Now, there are, like I said, it is protected by the Microsoft way of retaining your data, but if you want a third-party backup at this stage, like I said, they typically only do the email items and the files and folders. The other question I've got here.
You can also use AdPoint for backup,
Yep.
which we just run through quickly. Yeah.
So can you view the calendar in Teams? Basically, I assume we're talking about the shared calendar. The answer is yes. There are different ways to do it. There can be multiple calendars in Teams. There could be a calendar in SharePoint. There could be a calendar in Planner. There could be a calendar in the shared mailbox. The way I use it is I typically use the calendar in Planner, and I display that, embed that in the team so that the people can look at the planner, the tasks, the to-do list inside that. So the answer is yes, but there are different calendars, but they certainly can be surfaced within Teams. Does it have the same file limitations and file sizes? Okay, so again, it's built on SharePoint, so the limitations basically are SharePoint. So there is not a 5,000 item limit, all right? That is a misnomer. SharePoint can manage millions of documents in a document library. And again, file sizes at this stage, I think the maximum file size is 30 gig. So a single file can be 30 gig, but because it's built on SharePoint, it effectively it has those same limitations. But make sure you're aware that these old concepts of 5,000 items in a library and small file sizes and protected characters, again, is no longer the case for the whole environment. Only business versions of Office 365 offer Teams. All SKUs offer Teams. All right, so the only thing that doesn't offer Teams is Office 365 Home. All right, and we're talking about the commercial versions here. So all commercial suites of Office 365 and Microsoft 365 do offer Teams as part of that. Is there any advice for Teams client deployment in RDS environment? Okay, so at the end of the day, the Teams client as yet is not fully RDS aware. The roadmap has that they will do that in a short period of time. I'd have to look at the roadmap, but my understanding is that within this quarter, sometime before June, hopefully, we will see a revamp of the client, faster team switching, the ability to move between externals and internals much better, and work fully on an RDS environment. The only thing I would suggest in an RDS environment, if you are having issues, is to just use the web browser. If you need to work between multiple teams, use in private or profiles to do that. But it certainly is on the roadmap, very high priority that the client on Windows is revamped. And one of the revamping options will be that it supports fully the RDS environment. Question, how is it best to manage existing SharePoint site structure as departments already? Okay, so if you've got an existing structure, you can restructure it, you can connect it to Teams. There's nothing preventing you from moving stuff around. So again, if you have a structure, maybe you've got a top SharePoint site and the sub-sites underneath are finance, admin, HR, you could take that sub-site and make it a team. Just move the files across, move the information across, or you could connect a new team to that sort of location. You can provide a link to that, so you can create a team and then you can add a link basically to the location where the files are. So there's lots of ways of doing it, but best practice for me is to have a team, a dedicated SharePoint site as part of that team where the data lives, and you link it together using hub sites or your intranet navigation. All right, but again, up to you, but the flexibility is there. And also don't think of it as a structure set in stone that will never change. It's going to be a case of, okay, this works today, but tomorrow we need to make these changes. We've got the flexibility, we can do that. That's a value add that the reseller can come in and advise and provide the ability to move data around, to restructure it, to provide that. So again, don't think it's set in stone and it never changes. That's where the consulting, that's where the value add comes in, as Teams and Microsoft and Office 365 add additional services, value, functionality to go back to your customer and say, look, they've just added this. How about we do this way? Yes, it's a little bit of work, but the payoff is going to be down the end. So again, don't think of any of these solutions as the final endpoint. Just think of this as getting into a common base in which you can, again, expand, improve, and grow from there. Next question is, how do you control security for guest access to only certain documents in a team environment? So the way that you would do that is you would basically create a separate document library with the unique permissions that you want, and you would link that document library back into the team so it displays. So the way a team is by default is the default live file locations are read-write for everybody. So if you want, don't fiddle with that because that can cause problems. My advice to you, if you want different permissions inside the team for files and folders, create a separate document library inside the team, do the permissions the way you want, and then just link that back into the tabs across on the team. All right, what else we got here? Are there any Office 365 simple project planning templates and guides available? Not quite sure what you mean, guides for what, but the answer is going to be yes. Do a search. I assume, I think it means just if you're planning a project. There are multiple ways to do tasks in Office 365, as there is with everything. You can do Outlook tasks. You can basically do SharePoint tasks. You can do Planner. My advice to you for simple planning projects and stuff is to use Planner, and Planner now supports the ability to template and apply that template to other plans down the track. So they've added that ability to do it in Planner, so that has been added just recently. So I would be looking at Planner to do that in a simple way, very much like Trello, the way that Planner's laid out. Question here is, how does a client demo Skype for Business? How does a client demo Skype for Business with the current transition? Not quite sure what you mean by demo there. Again, there is pages and pages of Microsoft documentation on the transition from Skype to Business to Teams. All I can do is really suggest you go and have a look at that, have a play around with it, but at the end of the day, it's all going to end up in Teams. And what functionality are they using in Skype for Business will need to transition to Teams. Again, how do you do that in Teams? So again, there's lots and lots of documents on how to do that. It's generally, what I found personally, it's just a matter of getting in there and basically playing with the teams and finding out exactly where the different buttons are. But the functionality is certainly there. Okay, so a clarification from somebody. I mean a plan on a page, checklist, or that sort of thing. So again, lots of different ways of doing this sort of thing. If you want a checklist on a page, you can do it in OneNote, link OneNote into the team. You can create a SharePoint page that has items you check off. You can create a task list in SharePoint that you can view like a Gantt chart. You can create a to-do list in Planner. There are lots of different ways of doing this, right? My advice to you is the simplest approach, and the one that I think is most effective, is to use Planner, right? So again, have a look at the Microsoft Planner service from there. So use Planner rather than shared mailbox calendar. Again, it depends. What is the best tool for the job? If you haven't looked at Planner, my advice is to look at Planner, see what it can do. It's designed as a web interface tool to allow you to simply manage tasks, all right? Again, it doesn't do everything. It is for a specific reason. And again, if you use Trello, if you understand the concept of Kanban, which is moving things from to do, in progress, and done, again, that's what it's good for. If the calendar is the way it works better, that's fine. There are lots of different options. Personally, the way I would look at it is to try and do it in Planner first, because I think that's got more functionality and it integrates better with things like Flow. So we are over the hour here. Do we want to keep going with questions, or are we going to hold these off and answer those later?
We can answer them later via email.
Okay, all right. Well, thanks everybody for the questions, and I'll hand it back to you to round off for us.
Thank you all for joining us, and please do reach out to the Ingram Micro Cloud Sales team with the contact details as on the slide. Thank you.